Let's go check out every run at one of the biggest ski areas in the Midwest, Lutsen Mountains. What's going on, Midwest skiers and riders? Matthew Zabransky with MidwestSkiers.com, and today we got a great episode for you. We're going to be exploring one of the biggest and most notable ski areas in the entire Midwest, and that is Lutsen Mountains. But before we dive into the actual POVs and footage of all this, which will be a long one, heads up, this is going to probably be like a 2-hour video when it all is said and done, but we're comprehensive. We're going to walk you through everything that we possibly can. Let's get into some basic information before we do all that, though. The date that all of this footage was filmed was on March 2nd through March 3rd of 2026. It was a Tuesday/Wednesday, and the weather was interesting. So the Tuesday that I got there, which I skied Moose Mountain and Ullr, it was super sunny, great conditions, like beautiful, kind of spring-ish. It's like that weird time frame where it's like in between spring, not quite spring up there because it's still cold conditions, but really sunny, great visibility. And then Wednesday, complete cloud covered, and then we got a little bit of sun towards my final couple of runs on Wednesday over on Eagle. So that's the difference and why you're seeing kind of different weather as we move around, because this is, and obviously as you'll see as we go through it, this pretty much is to ski everything is going to take you about 2 days. You could speed run it in maybe a day, but there are a lot of runs here, and given their more limited operational hours from 9 in the morning or 10, depending on what day you go, until 4 in the afternoon, it can be really tricky to actually get to ski everything. So this ski area is obviously located in Lutsen, Minnesota. So it's going to be on the North Shore. It's pretty far up north, but it is a beautiful drive. I talk about this all the time. Driving that highway up there is just something really magical. It's really pretty. I definitely recommend driving it during the day if you can, because it's, first of all, a lot more to see and to look at, obviously, but then it's also a lot safer. There is a lot of deer that cross over that road, and I have had some very, very, very close calls over my several times going up there. I've been up there, I don't even know, probably at least a dozen times at this point. And I've had quite a few encounters with wildlife driving up there at dawn, dusk, and then obviously in the middle of the night. So just something to keep in mind. It's also just really pretty to drive during the day. So highly recommend it. As far as opening dates go, they aim for late November, so kind of that Thanksgiving time frame, to early December. Just going to depend on weather and how things are going. I would say generally they're going to be open Thanksgiving weekend, and then they run really, really far into the season, one of the latest in the entire Midwest, usually until the early May timeframe. I'll give you a couple of tips here about when to visit Lutsen, because this is obviously a usually a destination style area. I would definitely recommend Lutsen either early-ish season or late. I think late spring is when they shine the most, because all of the terrain is basically going to be open, and the way that this ski area faces and holds cold weather during the spring temperatures, it is some of the best spring skiing anywhere, like in the entire country. I'm not just saying that. It is because, first of all, everything is basically groomed every day. For the most part, there's a couple of bumped up runs that they don't groom, and obviously some glades, but that means that everything is skiable that morning, which is great, because when you go out west, a lot of times some of the runs are just not skiable because they don't groom them every single day, so you're working with a freeze-thaw cycle. That's generally not the case at Lutsen Mountains. They touch almost everything there, but not only that, the snow typically just it holds really, really well because it gets cold at night. And then obviously in the morning when the sun starts baking over at Moose Mountain, things soften up over there, and then you start to work your way over to Eagle. And it's just the vibe with the lake and everything. It is phenomenal. I was actually talking to Jim Vick this past spring when I was up there for Mountain Meltdown, and he said the same thing. He is now kind of semi-retired, travels around, skis everywhere across the country, and he specifically came back to Lutsen this spring by choice to ski it because he thinks this is the best spring skiing he has ever experienced. And I gotta agree with him. It is very, very special, and it's warm enough to actually enjoy it. And that's one of the downfalls of Lutsen if you go mid-winter. So I would say anytime at the end of January to like the middle of February, maybe mid-January to mid-February, that is a tricky zone where the weather can be a little bit challenging, both for wind holds and then obviously being very, very cold. For those that don't know, Lutsen, because it's located right off the lake there, has a lot of wind that kind of whips up, and it's one of the highest points in the area. And a lot of times they'll have to go on wind holds on a couple of their lifts, specifically the Gondola and then the Eagle high-speed chair. Those chairs, just the way that they're orientated and sit, they're really susceptible to wind. So that being said, it's something that you'll also want to kind of plan for and be aware of as you kind of look at planning your trip to Lutsen. But in the springtime, a lot of that stuff is not a factor. It's a lot warmer, a lot less wind, so it's a lot easier to get the full kind of Lutsen experience and not have to worry as much about the weather. So I always recommend that springtime is kind of the golden time to be up there. But I've had some really good midwinter trips to Lutsen as well, where I've gotten pounded with snow, and it was phenomenal. So take that for what it is. I will say, for as far as the wind situation, they're putting a new rope tow in, and they're going to have a shuttle system to then help open up moose, along with obviously the Ullr Chair and the mystery chair. So then that way, even if there are high winds, they can still be able to operate a good portion of the terrain. Specifically, moose was the big one, because obviously that's probably the biggest draw that people go to Lutsen, is to ski Moose Mountain. So this way they're going to be able to operate moose a lot more easily compared to, you know, what they've had to do in the past. So looking forward to that change, which is going to be coming for the 2026-27 season, this upcoming season, if you're watching this video as it is posted. As far as pricing goes, this one's a little bit trickier because they kind of use a dynamic ticketing system where, you know, depending on what days you go and when you buy, the prices are going to vary. Last season, when we were kind of doing some pricing for our spring destinations video, it was coming in to be like the mid 70s on the low end for a day ticket there, and then on the high end it was just over $100. I am going to pull up what they're listing on their website right now as far as their peak days. Another thing I do want to note is they do offer a 3-day flex pass, which can be used at any of their ski areas, the 3 of them. And if you buy it in advance, it's going to be much cheaper. So an adult, if you buy it before the October 15th deadline, it's $207, which comes out to be about $69 a day. Child, it's $117. They do a Cyber Monday break where it's going to be $237 or about $79 a day. For child, it's $147, $49 a day. And then in season, it is $267, which comes out to be $89 a day, or $177 for children, $59 a day. And then let's look at their peak lift ticket pricing. They don't have any of their value ticket pricing on their website right now. That's something I think that's going to just be, you're going to have to wait until in-season stuff, and then depending on when you buy, how many days you buy, there's going to be discounts and all that. As far as their peak, so this is kind of their top end here. If you're looking at just one-day lift tickets, if you buy them early, it's going to be $89. Online, 21 days in advance, $99. 3 to 21 days will be $109, which is probably where most people are going to fall. And then online, 1 to 2 days out, it's going to be $114, and then at the window is $119. They obviously do have discounts for multiple days. I talked about that already, but this is definitely a ski area that you could spend 2 days at pretty easily, in my opinion. So they do have discounts for that, and then they go all the way up to a 5-day discount if you wanted to do that. So that would be for your adults. As far as child pricing for peak days, it's going to be $59 if you buy early bird. 21 days out will be $64. $69 if you're 3 to 21 days out. 1 to 2 days out, or 0 days online will be $74, and then at the window will be $79. And then obviously they offer that same thing with multiple day discounts and all that. They do have lodging on site that is both partnerships. They have partnerships, Lutsen does, with some of the lodging options up there. So there are some stay and play packages. So there's a bunch of different things going on here. We obviously can't dive into all of that information in this video, but my biggest suggestion is to just check out their website in advance, see, if there might be a situation or a deal that's going to make a little bit more sense for you and your family, depending on when and where you're going. But just check out their website for all that information. But we just kind of want to paint a general picture of how much a lift ticket is going to cost there if you're just visiting for a day or two. As far as number of trails go, they are listing currently, as of 2026, 87 trails, with 58 main trails and 29 side country trails. We'll talk about more of what that means as we kind of work through the POVs. Basically, there's going to be their off-piste trails. You'll get to see most of those. There was some that were closed just because of snow and all that, but I would say we got the majority of them. Even though the conditions were not great, I still skied them for you guys because I want you to see what they have to offer here. Now, it is something to note here that it used to be 95 runs, and you will find the literature, the marketing is a little bit mixed messaging right now because they just changed it this past season to reduce it down to a more realistic trail count. They really did suffer from that Midwest mentality when building the trail map a few years ago, where it's just like everything was named way overnamed. It's still, in my opinion, is a little bit overnamed, but it's a lot better than it used to be. So it's a little bit more realistic to the actual trail count here, even though some of these runs are divided up a couple of times, which I don't think they need to be. But just to give you some information about that, because you might see some numbers going ranging from 95 all the way down to 87, just kind of depending on where you're looking, when you were looking, things like that. Lutsen has a total of 5 chairlifts, including 2 high-speed 6-packs, a gondola, which is obviously high speed, a carpet, and soon to be a rope tow. We talked about this a little bit already, but they're putting a brand new rope in their terrain park, which will also serve as kind of their extra backup when wind holds or a situation. They're going to run a shuttle service at the bottom, and then you can use that rope to then get you back up to Ski Hill Road. We have a video that kind of breaks that down into more detail on the channel, so go check out that. We'll link it up in the corner if you want to get more information on what that's going to look like for the upcoming season as for 2026-27. As far as vertical rise goes, we use a bunch of different sources to give you guys the most accurate information, including Lift Blog, obviously the installations from those, satellite imagery data, and then topography maps as well. As far as Ullr, I was coming up with about 270 feet of vertical rise. Eagle was about 630 feet of vertical rise. Moose Mountain was 770 feet of vertical rise. And then Mystery was about 620 feet of vertical rise. And the last thing I want to talk about before we dive into the walkthrough is the layout of Lutsen, because it can be kind of confusing and just, it's very weird. The first time you go there, you're going to be like, what is going on? So let's break it down for you. We'll pull up a trail map and I'll kind of walk you through really basic information. We're going to have a guide out that will kind of give you some tips and tricks depending on what you want to ski and where you're going and all that, but we'll just kind of give you a quick overview here. When you drive up Ski Hill Road, you're first going to go under a ski run, then you're going to go over a ski run as you enter the main base area. There's going to be an auxiliary parking lot off to your right-hand side as you're driving up, and that's going to be kind of their overflow parking lot. So that'll be where you end up on super duper busy days. Otherwise, you're going to have a few different parking options. There's going to be a lot that is located next to the first bridge, which is kind of where Bridge Run comes down, right next to the condos. That is a decent spot if you're basically just jumping on and going straight down to the lift. Lutsen does have reloadable RFID cards, so you can technically reload those online, so you don't even have to go back in to the ticketing office if you don't want to. So that's an option. Then you're going to come to a bunch of street parking before you go over the bridge. This is usually where I park if I can snag a spot, because it's a good balance between being close to the ticketing office and kind of that chalet area over there, but still being able to walk back and forth to your car. Otherwise, you're going to go over the bridge, and then your next parking lot's going to be past Papa Charlie's or Charlie's Bistro, and then there's going to be kind of a small parking lot located in the back there with some street parking along that side as well. It is very different. The parking situation is very unique in that there isn't really a best place to park. It's really situational. Like if you have your pass and you want to go straight to the lift, or you want to go straight to Moose Mountain, parking over by the bridge can sometimes be the first bridge that you go under is sometimes the best. If you need to get your tickets, I usually recommend the street parking if you can nab it over by the ski patrol area / on the street there. And then the parking over by Charlie's Alpine Bistro is good, but you're going to be doing a little bit more walking, but generally you can normally find a spot there. So it's going to depend on what you're skiing, when you show up, all that kind of fun stuff. As far as where you get your tickets, we mentioned this already, but the ticketing office is located kind of in the main gondola base area. It's located right adjacent to the bridge that goes over the Brule run. And then there's the Scandinavian Chalet, which is a small chalet. It's one of like the more original chalets with the ski area. And then there will be Charlie's Alpine Bistro, which is a little bit further down. And that's going to be kind of your dining. They open for breakfast, and then they close for lunch, and then they open for dinner. And then there's going to be a bunch of different lodging options kind of spread out in between all of that. And then Moose Mountain is going to have its own kind of chalet that you'll be able to access via the Moose Access Run. If you're on skis, you can ski that all the way down. It's kind of ski skate over there. Or you can take the gondola over there and then get out, and then you'll have access to the top of that chalet. That's a very quick overview of Lutsen Mountains layout. It is very, you could tell that it was designed in a way that wasn't thought about for the future, and they kind of kept adding on to it, and it's caused a little bit of a logistical situation for them. It's not that bad once you get the lay of the land and all of that fun stuff. The one thing that they do lack, however, is like a dedicated zone that's big and wide open for putting your gear on, doing all that kind of fun stuff. Right now, I would say the Scandinavian chalet is your best bet. The lower level kind of has a couple of benches, some bathrooms. They used to have lockers down there. They're kind of in the process of, I think, figuring out what they want to do with that situation. Generally, I'll put my gear on at the car and then just walk directly to the lift, or, grab my ticket, then go on. But that is one thing that Lutsen for sure doesn't have a ton of, is indoor kind of staging prep space. So just be aware of that if you're showing up, especially if you have kids, things like that. If you're coming from a condo, you might want to have them put their gear on before they head to Lutsen, before they show up to Lutsen. If you're close enough, obviously you don't want to be roasting in the car, but it might be worth having them put their gear on before you drive up Ski Hill Road, because once you get on site, especially if it's colder out and you don't want to be getting your stuff on by the car, it's kind of hard to find a space to put all that stuff on. But the second level of the Scandinavian chalet has some bench seating and all of that you can use as well, but it is pretty limited, especially for how big this ski area is. And I know that they do have future expansion plans. Some of that's been struck down by the Minnesota DNR, but they do have the opportunity, I believe, to build a chalet kind of off of Eagle, going down the other side, kind of where Mogen and Bridge Run is on that side over there. So that's something I know that they're looking into possibly in the future, because they're well aware of their chalet situation. But as somebody for visiting for the first time, it's just good to know that they have some limited space up there. So again, if you are coming from one of those hotels or lodges down the street, I'd recommend just kind of gearing up the best that you can there before you kind of head up to the actual ski area. And I know that was a lot of information, but we got a lot more coming at you, because we have to ski, what is it now, 87 different runs. So without further ado, let's get into it. So we are going to get started as you probably would normally get started at Lutsen Mountains, and that's to jump onto the gondola over at the main base area, and you're going to take this over to Moose Mountain. Now, there is another way to get over to Moose Mountain, which is usually how I get over there. I will show you that at the very kind of end of the Moose pod of skiing. I'll show you the Moose access run. That's generally the way that I get over there, just because it's a little bit quicker, and then you don't have to obviously wait in line for the gondola. I generally always start my day over at Moose Mountain, just because the sun hits it. It's really good skiing, especially when it's fresh cord over there. So generally speaking, the way that I ski Lutsen, and there's obviously no right or wrong way to do this, right? It's all personal preference. But generally speaking, I'll go over to Moose Mountain, ski over there for a good amount of time, a couple of hours, and then kind of make my way back over to Eagle and ski all that terrain, kind of to end out the day in the afternoon. Sometimes I might go over for some late laps over at Moose Mountain, but generally I'll start my day over at Moose. So this is their gondola. It is a 2015 Doppelmayr. It is the longest lift currently in the Midwest at 4,866 feet long. It doesn't really rise any vertical, maybe a few hundred feet, not very much. Really just meant for transportation. This is really just trying to get you back and forth between the Eagle, Ullr pods of skiing, and then getting over to Moose Mountain. It is a pretty long journey, and then this is what they also run during their fall, scenic stuff over the summer and then into the fall seasons as well. Kind of just have this hilly terrain, and then as you'll see as we get closer, there's going to be this massive kind of like rock face that is always a little bit, I'm not like scared of heights or anything, but just the way that this is cut, it has a pretty steep incline for sure. And if the wind's blowing, it can be a little bit spooky. Obviously perfectly safe, but amazing views. So off to our left, you'll have a view to Lake Superior. Off to our right, kind of the Superior National Forest, kind of off into the distance over there. But specifically as you're coming up this kind of bridge, this final ascent, there's some amazing views and just some amazing things to look at. So I recommend, this is one of those moments where you just kind of take in the atmosphere, you look around, just a really nice scenic ride. And this is one of those things that we don't get in the Midwest very often. I've actually lapped this a few times where I didn't even get off and just kind of rode it back and forth, taking in the views and stuff like that. But this will usually be the way that most people will kind of start out their day. They are 8-person cabins. For those of you that haven't been in a gondola, because maybe this is new to the Midwest, if you have skis that have kind of tails that are curved up, you're going to want to put one ski in first and then kind of shove the second one in on an angle, and you'll be able to fit those in there. Or you could put them into 2 different slots on the outside. And this will be the final ascent here that I was talking about. This will take us up to the top, and then you'll walk out, and then you'll kind of be at the, what I'll call like the main kind of base area for Moose Mountain. So we'll ride this one in, then we'll kind of get started with what you would basically take down Mark's Run to Moose Glade to Lower Meadows. So you're going to take your handful of steps out, you're going to click your skis in, and then this is probably going to be, this is the easiest way really to get all the way down to the Caribou Express. It basically just cuts across the entire terrain on Moose Mountain. The one thing you want to be aware of when you're taking this run, cutting across here, is that there is going to be cross traffic coming down from obviously all these runs kind of to our right-hand side. So just something to be aware of. Watch, keep your head on a swivel as you kind of come to some of these kind of, you know, obviously these connections here. Most of the steeper terrain on Moose Mountain is actually located closer to the gondola. As we ski through this, you'll see that. So most of the runs directly, if you kind of just come off the gondola and take a direct left and go down like Upper Grizzly and even Bull Run, those are going to be pretty steep. So if it's your first time over at Moose and you're concerned about steepness, this is the way that you want to take. Honestly, I recommend if this is your first time, this is probably the way you want to do it regardless, because you'll kind of get a good lay of the land of Moose Mountain because it cuts across most of the terrain, so you'll get a kind of feel for it. But, I mean, just look at this. This is why I love Lutsen. It is just so pretty. And Moose Mountain in particular, because you're looking at the lake your entire descent, it is something really, really special, and there is not many ski areas like this, honestly, in the entire country and even the world, that you have views like this. So we're going to run this one in, then we're going to take up the Caribou Express. So this is the Caribou Express. It is a 2013 Leitner Palma high-speed 6-pack. It is a really long lift line. I can't imagine riding this lift as a fixed grip. I didn't visit Lutsen until I think it would have been like 2019. So I have no idea what it was like, but I gotta imagine it was a long lift ride. You guys can let me know in the comments that have taken this fixed grip when it was there. Obviously, I've ridden the Timberwolf chair, which is off to our left-hand side. That was closed the day I was there. They only run that really when it's super duper busy, but that is a very long chair in itself, so I can only imagine what this lift line, which is a little bit longer, would be like. Underneath us, you'll get a feel for what Moose Mountain has to offer. Below us are basically two of their signature runs. Off to our left-hand side is going to be kind of the Caribou Run that runs down, top to bottom Caribou Run, and then our right-hand side is going to be Cascade. These are what most people would think of when they think of Moose Mountain. They're probably thinking about these few runs in this little pot of skiing. They have a very interesting, like, rolling terrain, but it's really lappable, and that's the thing that I think people love about this, is you can get a ton of vertical in because it is, you know, what the vertical we were coming up with is like 770 feet of vertical each lap, and obviously a high speed, and rarely lines over here because this thing can eat people, especially on weekdays, as you can see. I mean, you can get a ton of vertical in over here. It's nothing super steep. The only steep-ish part is really towards the very bottom. They have a kind of, because it goes into like a river valley there is a little bit of pitch at the bottom. You'll see that over the next, you know, whatever 20 runs that we do. It's going to have the same thing. So if you're skiing over here as a beginner, that's probably going to be the most intimidating part of the entire run, is the last little bit, that little dip at the very end. I'll give you some tips and tricks as we walk through those runs as to which one I think is the easiest, which will be Lower Meadows. But before that, we're going to run this one in, then we're going to get started all the way over on Looker's left-hand side with the Lighthouse run, which then is going to cut us into a couple other different little mini runs along the way. So technically this is going to be Lighthouse to Caribou Return to Coyote to Caribou Sneak. So This is the thing about this pod of skiing. Most of them are not labeled top to bottom. There's only a couple that are. But there's a lot of different like runs that kind of finger out between all of these. Obviously, we're kind of ski skating all the way out. Most people aren't going to take the Timberwolf chair just because it's really, really slow. This is accessible. It is kind of a pain to obviously have to skate over here. And I think that's the one thing about Moose Mountain that's a little bit frustrating / I understand why it's laid out this way. But because they only have one chair, realistically, that runs right up the middle, some of these runs on either far lookers left or far lookers right require a little bit of traversing to get over to that. And I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily, but if conditions are really slow, it can be a little bit frustrating, and it just doesn't lead to the most lappable runs. But as you can see, this is the Lighthouse run. Doesn't get traveled a lot, so if you're looking for fresh cord, especially a little bit later in the day, runs like Lighthouse and Timberwolf are great options because they generally don't see a lot of traffic because most people are going to be skiing directly under the lift or closer to the chalet area. But it has a nice, like, solid intermediate pitch. These runs are great because they're really nice and wide. Now, if you follow this straight down, the only way to get out of that is either to hike out or to take the Timberwolf chair out. And if that's not running, then obviously you don't want to do that. And that's why they have those signs there. So you're going to take this kind of offshoot here, and that's going to kind of get you back to the main kind of Caribou pod of skiing. Even though this is technically one pod of skiing, I'd almost define it as three. It's this section over here, the middle section, which would be like the Caribou main area, and then all the way over to where the chalet is. This section of the run is the most boring. That's the only downfall of these runs on this side, is that they have this Caribou to Coyote stretch, which is really kind of flat. I mean, you can kind of see it on screen here. You lose a lot of your speed, and actually there's a couple, like a moment a little bit further up where you might have to ski skate depending on how fast the snow is and depending on just how much speed you're carrying and all that kind of fun stuff. So that's the only downfall to these runs, is there's obviously going to be some traversing at the very top and then some traversing at the very bottom. And you will see this pattern for the runs that are kind of on the fringes of this pod of skiing at Moose Mountain. And then this is going to link up kind of with the final kind of last, I call these like the last river sections down here. This is technically Caribou Sneak. I like this one. It's a little bit steeper than some of the other ones. I would say the easiest one is going to be Lower Meadows, which we'll do a little bit later. And then the main Caribou one would be like the next in line there. So if you're looking for like the easiest of these three, I would say that Lower Meadows is going to be your best bet. Next, we're going to do the Gladed section in here, which is technically Red Rider, and then we're going to basically take the exact same outrun that we did before, where we'll take Caribou Return, Coyote, and then Caribou Sneak. So I'll talk you through this upper section here, and then once we get out of that, I'll just kind of let this run, and then we'll, obviously, the next run, we'll kind of meet back up and talk through it. So they have these little pods of trees in between the kind of main runs here, and the conditions are always a little bit questionable. It all is going to depend on natural snow and freeze-thaw cycles. When I went there, it was it was pretty bare, I would say, and then obviously there was a little bit of a freeze-thaw cycle going on, but it was still skiable for sure, especially later in the day when things kind of softened up. Now, this is at the beginning of the day. You can kind of probably hear that from some of my skis, the noises that they're making, but I did want to ski through all these the best that I could, and I knew that I would have to ski through these early to make sure that I got them all in for you. These are really, really fun when the snow is good. And specifically some of them that are a little bit further off to more of the chalet side, which we'll do a little bit later, are really, really good. They have a little bit more pitch to them. But these are good kind of like intermediate style glades where they're fairly spaced out. Nothing like too crazy, but good intro. And you'll see a lot of kids in here. And when the conditions are great, they're really, really fun to ski. And this will obviously then shoot you out back to where we just skied, the Timberwolf run, which will kind of run adjacent to that chairlift. And then we'll take that kind of same sneak all the way down to Caribou Sneak, and then obviously back down to the high-speed six-pack. So we'll let this one run in, then we'll go back up to the top, and then we're going to do a true top-to-bottom Timberwolf run with kind of the same run-out that we've been doing. So to me, this is the happy medium. Like, I like this run a lot because it gets less traveled, and I like the way that it's profiled and kind of wide open. It's a nice run, but you're not having to traverse as much. You can carry a little bit more speed kind of going into that outrun towards the bottom when you're traversing across back to the chairlift. So this is a good one to mix in between. If I'm skiing this little pod of skiing over here, it'd be like Caribou, Cascade, Moose Meadows, and then mix in a couple of Timberwolf here and there. But this is a good one, a little bit less traveled. Usually the snow holds up pretty well in here just because there's not as many people on it. But you can just really get some nice speed here. You can see a really nice, relatively consistently pitched run here. Really good for intermediate to advanced skiers. Just a lot of fun. These are just beautiful runs. I mean, you can see the lake all the way down on your descent. Just a good one. You got to enjoy. These are like quintessential when you think of Moose Mountain. The next handful of runs that we do are going to be kind of what most people think of Moose Mountain, just because that's what they associate with it. Now, when we get towards the bottom, we're going to take a slightly different cut towards kind of the bottom river valley. Instead of cutting to skier's right-hand side and taking Caribou Sneak, we're just going to stay straight off of Coyote, and that's going to take us into the Caribou kind of offshoot at the very end there, which I think is kind of the in-between one between the three, Caribou Lower Meadows and Caribou Sneak. So we'll run this one down, and then we will take that kind of that Caribou at the very end. And I'll kind of show you, I'll point out that when we get to it. So this is kind of the break where you're going to be able to choose between those few different fingers kind of coming down that river valley there. If you stay to skier's right-hand side, that's going to bring you over to Caribou Sneak. If you stay straight, that's going to feed you right into the main Caribou run. So for this one, we're obviously staying straight, and this has got a nice pitch to it as well, a little bit steep. You know, this would be, for intermediates, I could see people kind of struggling a little bit in this section, and that's where I think Lower Meadows is slightly better angled. It's not a whole lot better. It's still got some pitch to it, but a little bit better. Now this time we're going to pop into some of the woods, kind of in between Timberwolf and Caribou Curve. So this is technically White Wolf, and then we're going to kind of take that into the Stash, which is like another kind of hidden tree area, and then we'll obviously take that to Caribou Return, Coyote, and then Caribou Sneak as well. So it starts pretty similar, but we're going to kind of dive into this little tree section over here. And that is the nice thing about, I will say, about Moose when it is skiing. Like, when they have good natural snows, they have all these little pockets of trees where you don't get roped into doing a full-blown top-to-bottom tree run. You can do, like, this segment right here, right? This little, like, White Wolf tree segment where you get a little bit of trees going on, but it's nothing intense. This one's pretty wide open, specifically. And then it kind of shoots you back out to the main run, and then you can link it up with a few different tree runs. So you'll see that a little bit later where we actually link, like, similar to this run, where we go into, like, 2 or 3 separate like tree zones. So it's kind of cool that you can link them up into different little paths and patterns, which is really nice. And it's really nice for people that are not used to skiing top to bottom trees or things like that. So when we come out of this run, we're actually going to get shot out to Upper Coyote. We haven't seen this section. We've seen the lower part of Coyote via Caribou Return. We haven't seen this upper part. And this is how you get to the Stash, which is kind of like a secret little zone. It's a tight little tree section. The coverage was a little bit questionable on the day that I was here, but this one does not see a lot of traffic as well. So a nice little like hidden tree zone, not very big, kind of confusing. Sometimes when you rip through here, there's not like really a clear path as to where you're going. But you know, you just kind of follow through some tight tree sections, opens up a little bit, and then it gets kind of a little bit tighter again. Just a good thing to like mix in. Basically gonna get you back out to almost the Caribou Return run that then will bring you back down to Coyote. So this is like what is really different about Lutsen Mountains, in my opinion, is that they do have a lot of varied terrain and options for everybody, for the whole family. If you want to just take groomers, they have a lot of that. They do have trees. Now, I will say, now that we're back on the Caribou Returns, this has been the run that we have been doing, the lower section, that will then obviously meet up with a little bit of Coyote and then take us down in. The trees are very hard to get dialed. Like, I feel like, especially recently, the natural snow has been a little bit low tide. So that's one thing. Like, if you go to Lutsen and you don't get to ski the trees, go back on a day that you think you can ski the trees, because I think when the trees are open, specifically some of the ones that are over towards the Summit Chalet, those are some really, really good tree skiing. It's just some really good tree skiing. It really is, and it really changed my mind about Lutsen Mountains. I really thought of it as more of like a intermediate, like lower advanced ski area with some bumps. I love the bumps too. But when I got to actually ski some of the tree lines over there and blast through those when the conditions were really good, that was like all time, and it really did change my mentality about Lutsen Mountains. So now we're getting into what I would consider are the main ski runs at Moose Mountain between the next kind of 3-4. So this is going to be Caribou Curve. Now this one still is going to kind of, you're going to have to skate over to, but it's not going to have as much run out, especially because you can take Coyote, which is what we're going to do. So this is the first run in this area that I would say flows really, really well, where you're not having to have that flat section of Caribou return. Because the Coyote run is a lot more, it has a lot better pitch and kind of like profile than the previous runs that we've done. They had a little bit of like rollers on this side, so that was kind of fun. And then obviously this kind of curves around. It has a very similar pitch to that of Caribou. All these runs have a very similar profile for the most part. It kind of starts out, there's an intermediate pitch that goes for a while, then it has a little bit of a flattening out in the middle, and then kind of has a secondary pitch that kind of leads you in to the very end, specifically kind of down to that river valley then. So this is kind of that mid-section here, and there's the stash over to our right that we just did. And then this is where it kind of does flatten out a little bit, but not as intense as the Caribou return where you're actually having to cut across. So this one you can actually flow a little bit better through compared to the others. And then we're going to take this down to the main Caribou kind of chute at the very end, down at the river valley. So we'll run this one in, then we're going to do what is their signature run in this pod of skiing, Caribou. Alright, so this is going to be Caribou. This is what, obviously their signature run based off of their lift infrastructure and all that fun stuff. And this one just basically comes right off of the lift. It doesn't fall underneath the lift line. That would actually be kind of a mixture of Cascade and then Middle Meadows. But what's interesting about Caribou is when you get to kind of the midsection, you'll have the option to kind of take a bunch of different fingers that kind of pattern out into different areas. We're just going to take a top to bottom Caribou so you can kind of get a vibe for that. So this will have obviously a lot less flat section towards the bottom because you're not having to kind of traverse back to the lift. So it does still have that flat section, you're just not having to kind of have as much time to go all the way across. So this will be that flat section, obviously flatten out quite a bit. It'll find a slight secondary kind of fall line a little bit further up here, and then obviously going to dump you down to that river valley at the very end here. And these are the runs that are the most lappable. You're going to find the most amount of people on. People really like these runs because they have a moderate pitch. You know, at the very beginning it's, you know, got a nice consistent pitch, finds this secondary pitch kind of towards the tail end here. And the honest truth is they're just really lappable. They're really pretty, and they're easy to access. So these are going to be your most popular runs for sure. And honestly, they're going to be the best for beginners. You're not having to carry any kind of like massive amount of speed. You're not going to have to ski skate. For the most part, they just flow really, really well. So we're going to run this one in. Then we're going to actually do Cascade, which is going to run basically directly under that lift line. So this is Cascade, another one of what I would say is their signature runs in this pod of skiing here. Going to run basically directly under the lift line, and then there's going to be some kind of like cuts underneath that you'll take depending on like where you want to go. We're going to take kind of the left-hand cut, which technically is going to be Middle Meadows, and then that's going to feed us to Lower Meadows. So off to our right was the run that we just did, and then obviously this is just kind of the lift line. So these are like, man, if you want to get vertical in, these are the runs. Like you can on, off, high-speed turns, you know, especially when it's not crowded like this, and you can just kind of edge-to-edge, high-speed turns, really, really fun. The only downside to, it's actually not bad, it's kind of nice that it's very terrain, but in this segment here, it kind of flattens out a little bit, and then it'll find that secondary pitch a little bit later, kind of feed you in. So, like, this is where it's like, okay, take a little bit of a breather, right? Like, you know, you're kind of just carrying some speed, doing some kind of, you know, chill turns. and then you kind of fall into another secondary fall line, which then will kind of feed you down. So now this is where, if you take a left, you're going to go to the lower meadows, which I've been talking about is the easiest way to probably traverse that lower river valley there. But if you stay to the right there, that's going to take you back to the Caribou run there. So this is going to be kind of the best way to approach, in my opinion, this lower river valley. It is still fairly steep, but they do put up all the bee netting here. They put the slow signs up. So if you are a beginner or you have children, this is going to be the run that you're going to want to find yourself to, because this is going to be the most conducive to those beginner skiers. We're going to run this one in, then we're going to do Moose Meadows down to Middle Meadows, down to Lower Meadows, so the true Meadows run. As you can see, the upper part of this area where you unload is a little bit flat, so you're going to have to kind of ski skate to get out. But then once you kind of hit this run here, you'll find a little bit of pitch here that'll kind of feed you down. This is another really good run to mix in if you're just looking to lap, because it'll feed you basically right back down to that Lower Meadows run, so it's very lappable. This one does see a little bit less traffic as well, just because you obviously have to kind of ski skate over to it a little bit. So, but a really, really fun one. You can see it's just really fun to rail turns down this. Quintessential, you know, Moose Mountain skiing over here. These last couple of runs are like, those are the ones people are thinking of when they think Moose Mountain. But we'll run this one in, then we're going to do kind of the Highline cat track over to Moose Tracks, and then Lower Meadows. So technically this very top section up here is called Ridgeline. We're going to ski this every run from here on out for the most part. So this is kind of just the ridge. It goes all the way across, then goes to where we unloaded and the gondola. And then you're going to have all these runs that you kind of dive into. So generally speaking, as you get closer to the gondola unload slash chalet over there, things tend to get a little bit steeper. There are a couple exceptions with that. But we're going to take a dive into the run called Highline, which is actually kind of a treed section here. And then that'll feed us out to Moose Tracks. So this is kind of one of those little pockets of trees that you have up at the top here. You know, coverage was decent. Obviously the conditions, freeze thaw, not the best, but pretty decent. Again, these are nice little pockets where it's like you can get a taste of some tree skiing without getting too in trouble with anything. So as you can see, this will then push us back out to Moose Meadows. So then we're going to link this up with another little pod of tree skiing called Moose Tracks, which will kind of be off to our kind of right-hand side up here. And that's what I love about, like, Lutsen Mountains, is that they have these little trees, and they usually have enough natural snow, and I will say they do need a little bit of, in my opinion, a little bit of cleaning to do in some of these, especially as we get to the ones a little bit later in this video. This is the one that kind of, for people that have been there, this runs basically directly under the lift line. It shoots you out over there, basically. But this is technically the right way to enter it. Sometimes you can enter, depending on the snow, right under the lift, off the Cascade run. But this is technically how you would get into it officially. So you can see here, this is where kind of that, like, janky little section is, where you can kind of sometimes sneak into it from the Cascade run. But if you wanted to truly ski it top to bottom, this is how you would do it. And then this will meet us up with that, like, Middle Meadows to then Lower Meadows section. So we're going to run this one in, then we're going to do Buckshot, which is another little tree zone, to Middle Meadows to Caribou. Back up at the top here, taking that ridgeline run, kind of working our way down this ridgeline here, continuing on. This is going to have a very similar feel to the run that we just did. It's just going to be a little bit steeper, a little bit gnarlier, I guess. The trees are just slightly spaced closer. But these are kind of just really fun runs to kind of mix in. It has a very similar opening to that of Highline. We just kind of go a little bit further down the ridge a little bit. So yeah, I really enjoy the way that you can kind of mix all these different runs in together. I think it's really unique. It feels very out west, if you will, because this is kind of how out west is, where you can link all these different little sections together. So we'll sneak into the little tree section here, and then this will be kind of our buckshot zone up at the top here. Nicely spaced trees. Obviously could use some cleaning. A little more snow would be nice as well, but it's a good time. You know, it's just nice to have the option to have trees, to be honest, in the Midwest. If you have gladed areas and they're like even just skiable, I think that that's like a huge plus. There are just so many areas that don't get any snow, any natural snow anymore, that like they can't support any gladed areas, period. Just to have that option is pretty nice, not gonna lie. So we're gonna follow this out, and then this is gonna open up here in just a second, and this is gonna kind of be that middle meadow section towards the bottom here. And then we're gonna follow this down to Caribou, so we'll kind of cut over to skier's right hand side and take that cut down under the lift, and we'll follow that one in. Then we're gonna do Ridgeline, obviously that ridge up there, to Moose Glade to Lower Meadows. Working our way down that ridge line, we're going to go down to, now this is top to bottom actually cut run for the most part. It technically loses its name at Lower Meadows, that pitch at the very bottom. But this is Moose Meadows, which is a nice intermediate run as well. Only downfalls you obviously have to traverse over to. So we're getting into that zone now where this is like one of the last runs that you'll be taking. We'll do Bobcat as well, which is a tree run. But after this, really, then you're going to start kind of wanting to carry some speed at the bottom to get back to the lift. When we do runs like Cougar, Lower Bull Run, those are going to require a little more speed, just because now you're going to have to carry that, similar to how we did that on the other side with Lighthouse and Timberwolf. So this is going to be a slightly narrower run. It's going to have a little more pitch, especially in this upper section up here, compared to the runs like Cascade and Caribou. So this will be one that obviously you want to work into if you're looking for progression here. I think the easiest is going to be like your Caribou Curve, Cascade. Those are great ones. And then kind of work your way into Moose Meadows, Moose Glade, and then eventually into Upper Bowl, Cougar. Those ones will be good to move into then. Still kind of has that flattened out section here. And then we're going to kind of follow this all the way down and around. This is a nice, dude, they're just nice cruising runs. Like, if you enjoy, like, on-piste, like, cruisers, like, Moose Mountain specifically is it. I mean, even when you're just cruising, being able to, like, look up and see, like, the lake in the distance, and it's just so pretty, tree-line runs, like, it's just a very gorgeous setting. But we're going to run this one in, then we're going to do one of the tougher runs at Moose Mountain, which would be kind of Lynx down to Bobcat. So that one actually will be kind of interesting. You'll see, it was questionably covered. So this is one of the runs that was actually kind of consolidated. I think it used to be called Cowabunga, or Cowabunga used to be part of this run. And I'm glad that they started to consolidate. They could probably even consolidate a little bit more of some of these run names. But at the very top, we'll kind of take the ridgeline. We're going to do an upper tree section, which is called Lynx. We'll follow that basically halfway down the run. Then we're going to go over to skier's right-hand side and access Bobcat, which is one of the harder runs on Moose Mountain. Bobcat has a little like cliff drop kind of into it, and especially when it's questionably covered as it was this day, you didn't really have a choice where you were going to ski. You kind of had to ski where the snow was. This is a really fun one when the conditions are good. it's a good lappable sequence between Lynx, as you'll see as we're entering right now, has kind of like more spread out trees, nice to kind of rip some turns through, a little bit higher speed. And then obviously Bobcat's going to be a little bit more technical as you get a little bit further down. You're going to have that ridge line, that steeper kind of ridge line that comes down with that, like, kind of that little cliff band that kind of runs through there. So it's good. They're a good kind of like sequence there where you can kind of combine them together and make almost a top to bottom tree run. Now there is pretty much a top to bottom tree run, which we'll do a little bit later below the chalet area, but this is kind of a good secondary one where you can kind of mix these two in and make yourself a little top to bottom tree run. This section in particular is really nice, you know, obviously nicely spread out trees. The coverage is nice because they're spread out, so they get a little more snow to flow in there, so that's really nice. And it's just a good little tree zone. I know a lot of people love this one. This is a, you know, a really good one for, you know, lower advanced people that are just trying to get into tree skiing for the first time. Really nice one. And then it's going to kind of shoot you back out to kind of the Cougar run here, and then we're going to duck over to the right-hand side, and that is going to feed us to the Bobcat run. So this is one of the tougher runs here at Moose Mountain. The conditions were questionable at best, probably. But, you know, this is a fun one to rip through, especially if the conditions are good. So a little bit of a, we're going to have to follow the tree line here. And then as you'll see, we'll come up to like a little bit of a ridge up here. And I think I might actually stop and just kind of take a look at the terrain just because the snow coverage was a little bit not great. So I wanted to take a look and see what my options were as we kind of work our way through this section here. A little bit of a cliff band that kind of runs through there, and then obviously you just kind of pick your way through this little section down here. Really fun skiing, though. I mean, this is where, again, I think the first time I went to Lutsen, I didn't have the opportunity to ski some of these runs just because the conditions weren't there. So if you don't, first of all, obviously find these runs because they're kind of hidden. Definitely recommend you're like an expert skier. These are the runs that are going to change your mind about Lutsen. If you ski them on a really good day, they're a lot of fun, especially some of the ones that we'll do a little bit later, such as Red Fox, Cedar Ridge, Moose Maze. Like, those are awesome. They're really, really fun. And really, I think, elevate this pod of skiing more so than my first or second visit, my first few times, honestly, at Lutsen. I had an opinion about it. I thought it was really geared towards intermediate skiers only. You know, Eagle's great, but my mind changed once some of this terrain, I got to ski some of this terrain, especially on a really good year, and it really changed my view of what Lutsen's ceiling truly is. So this next run that we're going to do is basically just going to be an on-piste run. We're going to combine Moose Glade with Cougar at the bottom. Cougar is going to have a slightly steeper pitch, so you remember that the cliff drop, kind of cliff band that we had there. Cougar is going to have that similar pitch, but it's just obviously smoothed out. There's not going to be an actual drop or anything that you got to work yourself through. So this is a really good run. Obviously kind of an intermediate pitch towards the top and then kind of have a steeper run at the bottom. And it's going to be kind of the vibe for the next handful of runs, right? They're going to have a intermediate-ish pitch at the top, and then towards the bottom there's going to be a secondary fall line that's going to have a pretty steep pitch. So runs like lower Bull Run, Moose Drop, and then lower Grizzly are going to have that kind of like steeper pitch. So these are ones that if you're in an intermediate or your first time visiting, I would like work your way into these ones. They're not super steep or anything like that, but they're definitely going to be steeper than, you know, your average Midwest black, if I were to say that. So, you know, if you have a beginner, if you're an intermediate skier, probably work your way into that. This is probably a good place to start. Now, I know that they list moguls on Cougar. As you'll see in a little bit, there was no moguls when I was there. So I don't know if that's something that, like, they'll do or not. If they had moguls on them, that would be awesome. But generally speaking, the only moguls that they do over on this side traditionally has been Grizzly. So I don't know. We'll have to kind of keep our eyes peeled to see if they do have moguls on this run. So this is going to be kind of that secondary fall line here. Off to our right is kind of where we entered that Bobcat section in there. And then this is kind of where that fall off section is with a little bit of pitch to it. So really fun, nice run. Obviously, we're starting to get to that zone now where we're going to carry some speed towards the bottom. So you'll kind of start to notice as I get a little bit lower down here, I'm going to start to kind of widen my turns out a little bit and basically want to carry some speed to make it back to the lift. This one's not that bad, but as we get to the next couple, it's going to start to get progressively further and further, and it's going to start to require some kind of skating and pulling as we get towards the bottom here. But we're going to run this one in, and then we're going to go up to the top and do line of bowl to lower Bull Run. Get started over here on the ridge as we've been doing for all the past previous runs. And we're going to do kind of a little bit of a tree zone section called Line of Bowl. It's actually where the old Ullr Chair used to go up. So that's has like double meaning. I love it. Line of Bowl slash the lift line of the Ullr Chair. So I like that. So it kind of has trees, but it's mostly just like an old school lift line. So it's cut, but it's kind of grown in a little bit, but it's a little bit narrower than, a lot of the, cut runs that we have these days. So it's a good one. And then this will obviously then feed us down to the lower bowl run, which will have a pretty similar profile to that of Cougar. So these are starting to get into their steeper terrain that is at Moose Mountain. So this is kind of like when you start to talk about the harder stuff at Moose Mountain, these are going to be the runs that you're thinking about, besides the runs off the backside, which we'll talk about at the very end because we didn't get the opportunity to ski those because they were closed. But this is kind of that lift line here. They do have little pockets of trees that you can kind of dive into off to the sides. But then this will follow that old lift line. You can literally see it as we're skiing down it, right? That's where the Ullr Chair used to be, which I never got to ride it, but I could imagine it would just be such a nice lift ride because it would take, as you see when you get to the bottom, it'll take some of that traversing that you start to experience with these runs out of the equation. So I think it'd be such a fun one to get to experience. So we do jump into Lynx for a little bit here, just kind of this lower section of Lynx, and then this just kind of spits us right back out to lower bowl run. So you can obviously, if you didn't want to go through the tree section, you can kind of avoid that section, but I kind of paired it up, and then this kind of will shoot us off to skier's left-hand side, which will then meet up with lower bowl. So we'll run this one in, then we're going to do the top to bottom Grizzly run. So we're going to follow that ridgeline almost to the very end. There's obviously going to be one more marked cut trail that we'll do next that is called Grizzly. But this will be upper bowl run. And then what we're going to actually do, instead of doing lower bowl run, which we took just a run ago, we're going to actually go to a little bit of an offshoot, which is called Moose Drop, which is kind of fun. If you get a little bit of speed, you can kind of pop off it. It's a fun one. So we'll kind of do that little offshoot towards the bottom. This is one that kind of starts, a little, again, very kind of intermediate pitch towards the top, and then kind of has that secondary steeper fall line kind of once you hit that middle section here. So these few runs between your Cougar, your Bull Run, your Grizzly, these are going to be your most advanced on-piste runs at Moose Mountain. So a lot of the expert skiers will kind of find themselves over here, and then obviously mixing in, if the trees are skiable, mixing in some of these tree runs as well. But these are going to have more pitch to them than obviously the ones that are closer to the lift over there. So we're going to run this one down in. I'll kind of point out where we get to that Moose Drop offshoot there. Otherwise, we'll run this on down. So once we get to the flat section up here, this is where you're going to want to start to veer off to the left a little bit. And then you're going to find this little kind of offshoot over here that's called Moose Drop. It's a fun one. A little bit of an offshoot over here. Nice little solid pitch. Again, these are some nice little turns at the bottom here. They're really, really fun. A lot less travel, though. So if you're looking for, like, fresh cord, Moose Drop generally doesn't have as much traffic as, obviously, lower Bull Run. So kind of enjoy mixing that one in when we're kind of lapping this little zone over here. So we'll run this one in, then we're going to do upper and lower Grizzly. All right, while we're doing this ridge run, I'm going to make my plea right now to anybody that's at Lutsen. I've said this to management before. We need Grizzly bumps the entire year. Like, when you go there in the spring and they set them up, they usually set them up for the last month or so of the season, and they ski so well. It's like the perfect bump room. I know everyone talks about Harikari, but like when Grizzly is bumped up and the conditions are good, I say it's better because the way it's pitched, it starts out like mellower and then kind of has a nice fall line, and it's so long. I just can we get bumps? Can we get bumps on Grizzly like all the time? Because that would be amazing, and I know all the bump skiers out there would really appreciate it. Or even half bumps, maybe do the half a run. I know like not everybody loves having bumps on one of the steeper runs on Moose Mountain, but I'm making my pitch right now. I am making my pitch for bumps all year long on Grizzly because it is phenomenal. It's really good skiing and it's fantastic. So this will be the last cut run that you can do basically on this side of the ski area, and I would say it's probably the most advanced cut run that they have. It's a little bit mellower towards the top and then gets a little bit steeper on kind of that final head wall. The only thing that kind of stinks about it is that because of how far it is away from the chair, you end up having to kind of carry as much speed as possible at the bottom to then make it back to the high speed. So like, but this is a really fun run, and I understand why they don't put moguls on it because they want to groom it and people like ripping down it, and that's great. But when this thing is bumped up, it is absolutely phenomenal because it has that like perfect pitch. It's just really good. The cut off to our right a little further up, that is the moose drop run that we just did. That will cut off some of this at the very end here. So if you didn't want to like skate and pull your way back, that moose drop does cut a little bit, not a ton, but it'll kind of help you get over a little bit further, so then you're not having to do as much pulling and skating. We're going to run this one in, then we have a couple of gladed runs to finish off this pod of skiing. So again, we're going to take this ridge line all the way across, and we're going to jump into a tree kind of gladed section that basically is right underneath where the old chalet used to be, and I'll point this out as we get a little bit further down in the video here. Now there's 4 labeled runs here, but it really boils down to 2 main tree runs that kind of cut through this area down here. We'll run through kind of what will be skiers' right-hand side, and this is going to be Red Fox to Bear's Den, and then we kind of skirt out to Lower Grizzly, and then the next run that we'll do after this one is the next run down, which is then Cedar Ridge to Moose Maze. So they kind of are clumped together. If this was like an out west area, this would probably just be considered one kind of zone of tree skiing, but this is really, really solid tree skiing. And this run in particular, the one that's slightly closer to Grizzly, Lower Grizzly, and then Moose Drop, which we eventually will take on this run, this is a lot easier to get out of. You'll see when we do the next run, you kind of end up on the cat track coming back, so you do have to kind of skate and pull a little bit. But if you take this run, you'll see we're able to cut out a little bit before kind of that cat track, so that makes it a little bit more lappable than kind of going a little bit further down. So you can see we're going to pass back down the main chalet over here. Off to our left, you can see the old chalet in the distance here. So this is where you kind of first drop in, and depending on conditions, you can drop in a little bit higher towards that chalet, or like we're going to do right now, we have to come in a little bit lower just because conditions were a little bit dicier. As you can kind of see on screen, the conditions were not ideal, not terrible, but not great either. These are just really, really nicely spaced trees, really good for ripping through. The top portion is going to be a little bit more mellow pitched. This side on the right hand side, skier's right hand side, this run is a little bit more spaced out. Over on the other side, as you'll see in the next run, a little bit narrower, not too much, but they have a pretty similar vibe. I would say the other area is a little bit steeper, a little bit gnarlier, so this is probably a better one to start on. This is kind of a little bit of a cat track that comes through, and then it kind of finds a secondary pitch as you go in. Things do get a little bit steeper as we get a little bit further down. Now, because we are staying closer to skiers' right-hand side, you'll see we're able to actually pop out back onto the main trail as we get a little bit further down here. So that's kind of a nice feature of staying on this run versus the one that we'll do next, just because it does make it a little bit more lappable there. So you got some nice little tree sections in here. These are just really fun runs. The only downfall or only problem is they're not always skiable, just because they do rely a lot on obviously natural snow in this zone here. So this will kick us right back out to kind of Lower Grizzly, and then we'll kind of cut across over to Moose Drop, and then this will take a lot of that traverse out. So in the next run, you'll get to see kind of how that full traverse looks like, and why that little bit there actually is a lot more lappable, because you can cut all the way across. But they both have their own little quirks, and honestly, this run and then the next one are some of my favorites, basically at Lutsen Mountains, especially if they're skiing really well. So we're going to run this one, and then we'll do the final run over at this pot of skiing, which is going to be Cedar Ridge to Moose Maze. So this will be the last run that we do in this pod of skiing. And this is some of the best tree skiing across the Midwest, especially when conditions are right. I think it needs a lot of cleaning, and I'm hopeful that they will get in there and do some cleaning. They've had some really low tide seasons the past few years, so I don't think that's helping the cause. But when this zone is adequately covered, it is a ton of fun. Like, it feels like skiing tree zones out west. It's got a nice mellower pitch at the top, and then kind of has a nice steeper pitch towards the bottom. The only downside is you got to traverse all the way over there, and then you got to traverse out, which maybe is not a bad thing because it gets less traveled. I mean, I don't even know. Some people don't even know that this is here. Off to our left, you can see the old chalet, and that's where we're going to basically enter. When it's like full coverage, you can actually enter a little bit higher, just under that. But we're going to enter, this is called Red Fox. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to kind of sneak our way over to a little bit of Cedar Ridge. And then we're going to follow down Moose Maze towards the bottom here. So there's technically like 4 different runs in this zone, but you know, this is where, like, if it was out west, I think they would just label this like almost just one little tree zone of skiing, not just like individual runs, because that's usually how they do it. But as you can see, we kind of worked our way over to Cedar Ridge. This is literally on the ridge of that kind of mountain over there. And this is some really fun tree skiing. The spacing is really nice and pretty forgiving, to be honest. And then at the bottom, you'll see, as we kind of cross over Moose Crossing here, this section then gets a little bit steeper and offers some like steeper, more technical turns. And there's even like a little bit of a cliff band that kind of runs through here as well. So this is a lot of fun. This is the zone that made me truly believe in Lutsen as like an expert skier. Because for the longest time, I was like, oh, they don't have anything for really, you know, technical skiing. They obviously have some bumps and some steeper groomed runs and all that, but when I got to ski this, specifically up here skiing with TGR, and got to ski this when it was in a really good conditions, this was so fun. And you can see down here we're battling some questionable you know, conditions going on here, picking our way through. But this is the zone, man. I can lap this all day when the conditions are great. It is so much fun, and it's one of those areas that I don't think enough people get to experience when they go to Lutsen. Sometimes just because the conditions are rough. Up to our right up there, if you look, that is technically Bear's Den, so it's the run adjacent to it. But as I was saying, this is the run that, like, in my opinion, like, these zones, some of these tree zones, a lot of people just don't ever get to ski them because they're not skiable a lot of the time. And you catch them on a good year, and you start to understand, like, it all makes sense once you get to ski some of these runs. And it really did change my view on Lutsen. So if you've been to Lutsen before and you haven't skied these tree sections that I have showed you, go back when there's a high tide, check the conditions, check the weather, watch it over the course of the year. Springtime, like early spring, is going to be your best bet because obviously they're going to collect all that snow over the winter. And if you time it right, some of these runs are just an absolute hoot. And the fact that they're serviced by high speed, and yes, you have to snow skate, as you can see, back to the chair. They are a lot of fun, and I really, really enjoy this pot of skiing. So before we close it up with Moose Mountain, I want to show you how to get to Moose Mountain if you just wanted to get there on skis. So this is one of my biggest tips for people that are visiting. If you're starting your day at Moose Mountain, which I said most people are going to, I highly suggest or prefer, in my opinion, taking the Moose Access run rather than taking the gondola, because you're going to beat everybody to Moose. And honestly, what they end up doing is they spin Caribou Express usually a little bit earlier than you expect. So getting over there early and then lining up and catching like first couple of chairs is amazing, because not only is it going to be fresh cord, the conditions are going to be amazing, but there's nobody there. So like you're the only person there, and you feel like you got the like, if you look at the footage from the very beginning of this, that's basically how it is on most days when you get there, when you take this Moose Access run all the way down and you wait for that first chair down there. Now you're ahead of the entire gang, and when you get up there, you have the whole place to yourself. You have the sun, if it's a nice day, the sun's kind of still lower on the horizon. It's beautiful. This is a good one. So I mentioned parking on that street there. You would clip in right by that first bridge that you go under, kind of the bridge run bridge, and then you would follow this past the condos. So off to our left here, this is going to be where Mogul's Bar and Grill is. You can ski kind of into that. And then obviously all the condominiums. So if you're doing your ski in, ski out accommodations, this is the run that you're going to take to access kind of all of those different amenities over there in areas. So this one goes down for a while. You want to carry as much speed as possible depending on the day. You're always going to have to snow skate. It's just a matter of like how much. And on a good fast day, you can usually make it just to like just past the bridge as we get further down. But you're going to want to carry as much speed as possible on this run. But this is a really good little hack here. It is a beautiful, chill, like relaxing experience. You're just kind of going through the woods. Obviously, there's not a lot of pitch here. You're not making really any turns. But again, I love doing this when I first get there. And if I'm just going to get started at Moose, this is the way to do it. So we're going to run this one in, and then we are going to hop on over to the mystery chair and check out that pot of skiing. Let's take a ride up what is probably the most elusive chairlift, especially top to bottom in the entire Midwest. Oh man, this is the mystery riblet double. It replaced a very long Palma lift back in the 1980s. I don't have an exact date on that. It is a very long chair, as you're about to see on screen here. And it has a mid-load station, or did have a mid-load station. I don't know what the future of the mid-load station is, but the year that I was there, this year, 2026, they were not using the mid-load station. They were going all the way up to the top. And it was the first time I have ever ridden this chair to the very top. So I was very excited because, first of all, Mystery has been a struggle the last handful of seasons for Lutsen. It's been hard to keep snow on there. It's been low natural snow years, and then they had some snowmaking issues and this pod of skiing. So it's great to see it back online. Now, they did a couple of things. They did close, if you look to our like left-hand side in the map, you can kind of see it. Those few runs over on that side are temporarily closed. I do think eventually they will get in there, kind of clear those back out again, and eventually they will get this pod kind of back up and fully operational. But for now, it really did only boil down to 2 runs kind of off to our right-hand side. Mystery's topography is very interesting. It's almost like 2 fall lines and then a big flat section in the middle. And that's why I think the mid-load station did actually kind of make a little bit of sense. But I gotta say, this chair might be one of the most peaceful chairlift rides you will ever take. Because it's a riblet, it sits a little bit lower in the tree line. It's basically a really tight coverage chair, so they've got trees on either side of you. And it's just really pretty. And the way that it faces and the way that it goes away from this main ski area, it is so peaceful and quiet over here. You go to this pod of skiing and it's just like you feel like you're on a different world to some degree. It is really, really cool. You can hear the birds chirping. It is just a full experience. For those that haven't ridden this lift, especially top to bottom, it is well worth it. It was really cool. I was very excited to be able to ride this one top to bottom. I've did the mid-load station a handful of times, but being able to actually ride this one top to bottom was pretty phenomenal. So speaking of, we're going to let this one ride on in, and then we're going to take white pine to white birch, and I'll let you guys just enjoy the views. As we unload, if you look into the distance, you can actually see remnants of that old pommel lift. We're going to get started kind of with the white pine and white birch section, so it's going to be off to skier's right-hand side as we kind of go through here. Kind of get started with like a little bit of a head wall, like pitch up here, and then it's going to flatten out towards the middle like I was mentioning, and then there's going to be kind of a secondary pitch towards the bottom, which is really fun. I know this is a hot take, but like I don't necessarily understand the huge appeal to Mystery Mountain. I think for intermediates it's a decent pod of skiing, but I think it needs a little bit of work just in like some of the grading could be improved, and then obviously the infrastructure, getting snowmaking up and going all the way to the top would be great. The lift is very long, so you know, maybe an eventual replacement, but this segment right here where it just flattens out so flat and you end up having to almost pull and skate here, that's the thing that kind of gets me about Mystery. But it is a good stepping stone, and surprisingly, it was one of the earliest pods that opened with this ski area, which I kind of found fascinating to me. I think it does have a lot of potential, but I definitely think it needs a little bit of work. So people love this pod, though, so I'm going to leave it up for debate. If you guys want to go like mention in the comments, I don't know if it's because it is so secluded, it feels like untouched in a weird way. I'm not sure what it is about this pod of skiing, or maybe it's because it's elusive, because it's like never open. They have limited hours. They only run it in the afternoons. That might be why. But whatever it is, this pod of skiing has some sort of aura around it, and for me, it just doesn't quite hit the mark. I think this lower section is pretty fun. It's got a, you know, an intermediate style pitch. It's more consistently pitched, so you're not having that like flat section. But I do see the potential. I think with clearing out some of the runs on the other side, getting snowmaking, maybe doing a little bit of regrading in some areas, I think that there could be a lot of potential for this pod of skiing. But we're going to run this one in, then we're going to do the other side of the, kind of this pod here, which will be white pine to then log chute towards the bottom. So this will start out very similarly, kind of it's only really one run. Off to our right, they do have technically a gladed section. I'm using air quotes here because it was so, there was so much undergrowth there that it was not even skiable. I mean, you've seen what I've skied like in this video, and that was just not even to the point where I can get through that. So I hope that in the future that gets kind of cleared out, because there's some good little zones over there. And yeah, Mystery is such an interesting one to me. You know, just because the top is so flat, I almost feel like it's better off of the mid-load station. But I understand people wanting to go to the very top. They want the full experience of getting, what is it, like 620 feet of vertical. That's a lot in the Midwest. So, but this middle section, man, just kills all the vibes for me. And I couldn't imagine if you were a snowboarder, I feel like you would almost have to unstrap here and basically hike up the hill a little bit. I don't know. Snowboarders, you can let me know in the comments, but it's pretty brutal. So I don't know if that's something they can fix with some regrading, or I'm not sure how that would go, or maybe on a faster day it's slightly better. This is my first time, as I mentioned, skiing a top to bottom mystery run. Yeah, I was a little bit disappointed, honestly, with the upper section, because I've skied the lower section a lot, and I've actually found that to be pretty fun, but the upper section was like a little bit lackluster in my opinion. Off into the distance, you can see Eagle. We'll do that in just a bit. So this is kind of the split where if you stay to the left-hand side, that's going to feed you over to Log Chute versus White Birch, which will be obviously on skier's right-hand side if you follow that, which we just did. So to have a very similar feel, this one's technically a little bit narrower. It might be slightly steeper towards the bottom. I think they both have a pretty similar feel, where they kind of start out with this like slightly mellow pitch, and then they kind of get a little bit more pitch as you get a little bit further down. And this is the segment of mystery that I can understand really enjoying. And they used to do a border cross course on the run that we just did, and that was a lot of fun as well. But I really do enjoy these runs, especially if you're an intermediate skier. But I don't know about the upper section, so I feel like maybe they need to bring back the mid-load station, or maybe they are for future. I'm not sure. But I kind of just find that upper section to be a little bit lackluster. So we're going to go ahead and run this one, and then we're going to hop over to the main chalet area where we're going to do a run called Brule, which will take us all the way down to their newest lift as of filming this video, the Raptor Express. This is going to be taking off from the Scandinavian Chalet, or kind of like where the ticketing office is on our right-hand side. We're going to go under the bridge here. And then what we're going to do is then take this down into the river valley. And there's going to be another bridge that's going to feed us down over to the Raptor Express. Now, there is a, if you stick to the skier's right-hand side, there is kind of a, what they designated as a, like, more beginner-friendly way to get down from this side. Kind of wraps all the way down and around. But usually you're going to want to take the front face because you're going to want to carry as much speed as possible, because as you can see at the bottom here, it gets really slow. Sometimes if the snow is good and fast, you can make it without skating, but usually you get to about this bridge here and you kind of have to kick into skiing, skating, and pulling to get back over to the Raptor Express. And I think that's my biggest critique with the Raptor Express. And it's not anything an alignment could fix, but it just makes me miss the 10th Mountain Division chair so much, especially in the spring when you're just wanting to lap moguls and things like that. It makes it hard because you got to go all the way down into that valley, and there's always going to be that flat section down there, no matter like how you cut it. Now, the other side is better when you're skiing runs like the bridge run and Experts Cutoff and things like that, which we'll do a little bit later. But yeah. So this is the Raptor Express. It is their newest chairlift as of filming this video. It is a 2023 Leitner Palma high-speed 6-pack. They have made a couple changes to this lift since it was put into service. For some reason, they took the footrests off the first year that they ran it, but those are back on, so that's good to see. And then they got rid of the 90-degree unload at the top, so that was causing some issues with people just getting off. I think the idea was to, it was kind of a tough situation to hold snow up there, so I think they wanted to have them come around and help funnel people over to kind of the bridge run. but it made it kind of confusing for people because then you're sitting on the lift waiting it for to make that corner. So they changed it to just a traditional straight unload, which obviously makes all the terrain on our looker's left-hand side a lot more accessible, and it's just more natural for people that obviously ski. You know, it's more what we're used to. So I think it made a lot of sense, and I really appreciate the change. This lift does see a lot of wind. We mentioned that earlier in this video, but this is one of the lifts that will go down for wind holds if there is sustained winds. Generally speaking, I would say, you know, if it's over 20 miles an hour plus sustained, that's going to be probably going to be triggering a wind hold to some degree. If it's under that, there's a good chance that they will be running it, but just something to be aware of. Now we're going to get started all the way over kind of on the expert side of this Eagle pod here. And this is technically going to be Chris's Couloir. And there's going to be a bunch of runs that kind of come off this face. And this is going to be some of the steepest terrain that Lutsen has. There are 2 runs that go off the backside of Moose that technically are steeper, but they're not open very often, and they kind of have a huge long traverse. I'll talk about those at the very end because in the things that we missed section. But these are going to be, this pod of skiing in general off the front face of Eagle, or the chalet facing side, this is going to be where all like the expert level skiing is going to be if you just want bumps and then obviously groomed or cut runs. You're going to find this over here. So all of these runs kind of follow a relatively similar pattern where they're going to have a steep head wall, they're going to flatten out, and then you're going to go to that run that we just did, that Brule run. So depending on where it's located on Eagle, depends on how much of a traverse back there is. So this one obviously is going to have the longest traverse. Now, what we're going to do is we're actually going to cut the video when we get to the Scandinavian chalet because we just did that lower section, so I didn't feel like we needed to repeat it over and over and over again. So we'll cut it here, and then we'll go back up to the top and do Cliff Run, which is the run next to it. So it's going to be a little bit narrower. This one does have a little bit more pitch. They all have pretty similar pitches, in my opinion, up here. It has like a little bit of a steeper head wall, then flattens out a little bit, and then there's like a secondary pitch that's not quite as intense that you'll kind of see as we hit about here. And these runs are runs between these 3, Chris's, Cliff, and George's. I don't usually ski these a ton, just because the run out towards the bottom. But they are good if you're looking for some corduroy. George's was actually some really fun bumps in there. They've been letting that bump up, which was cool. But they're really fun runs to mix in. But most of the time I find myself skiing more closely to kind of the actual lift. So that would be obviously Harikari, Koo-Koo, and Carolyn's Challenge. I feel like those are more the ones that I find myself lapping. But all these have a very similar feel to them. It's just a matter of like how narrow they are, how wide they are, things like that. But they're profiled very, very similarly. And then obviously some of them are going to have bumps on them as well. Speaking of, let's go up and do George's, which they have been just letting get naturally bumped up. Dude, this was a lot of fun. I love this run. You know, I was kind of rushing to get out this day because I had to make it down for another filming, but I really wanted to lap this, and I did lap this a few times just because it was super duper fun. Between this and Harikari, these are some amazing little bump runs on this side of the ski area. And honestly, in springtime, yes, love it. So, as you can see, they're letting this get bumped up all the way down top to bottom. Gotta love it. And these are not as manufactured. These, I think they just kind of let them go. So these are more of like the natural style bumps, or just a little bit chaotic. So, you know, if you like that kind of thing, that's for you, great. But they're definitely not going to be those manicured bumps that we see that people try to seed and then make. So we're going to run this one in. Then we're going to do the Manitou Bowl down to Raven. kind of the Manitou bowl that goes right underneath the chair. It's going to feed you into then 3 basically different runs. Raven, Caroline's Challenge, and then Koo-Koo. We're going to kind of just take it right-hand side here, and this is going to be kind of a little offshoot here called Raven. Again, they all have very similar feels. Like, these runs don't feel super distinct to me. It's just a matter of how narrow they are. They all kind of have that, like, secondary fall line, and then obviously kind of that flat kind of cat track that then feeds you back on down to the Scandinavian Chalet. So we'll run this one in, then we're going to do Caroline's Challenge. Same upper section here, basically just going to follow under that lift line there. This is a nice little like steep section here. As you get closer to Split Rock, which I think is technically the steepest run on this side of the ski area, I would venture to say. Like, it's a little bit steeper, so you can kind of pick where you want to drop in. And then obviously this is going to be kind of that Caroline's Challenge section over on the skier's right hand side, and then to our left is Koo-Koo. So good groomed runs, good railing turn style runs. I do like the rolling terrain, so it's not just like a straight, consistently pitched. It has that like little flat section, which is kind of fun to mix in. But yeah, they're all, you know, profiled pretty much the same. So let's run this one in, then we'll do Koo-Koo. So this will be Koo-Koo, so we're going to go off to skier's left-hand side and kind of hug the tree line a little bit more. This one's really fun. This is the one I find myself lapping more often than not on this kind of side. And then there are like kind of like a little tree zone called Fall Line, which we'll do in a little bit here. That one is a lot of fun as well, so I usually mix that in when we do that. And you could take Split Rock into this as well, which we'll do next. So you kind of have that option. But these, you can get some really nice high-speed turns. It's got some nice pitch to it. You kind of rip through the chalet. The only downside, again, is that you kind of have to go all the way down to the bottom. So back in the day, the 10th mountain chair would be about right down here in front of us. And then that would bring us up to the top, so you could just ski that steeper section. So I do miss that, but I understand why they went all the way top to bottom. So this next one, we're going to go all the way back and around what the bridge chair is. They don't run that during winter operations. I'll kind of talk about that on the things we missed. But this is going to be Split Rock, and there is kind of like a little cliff area up here if you really want to. But this is going to be, I think, the steepest pitch on this pod of skiing at the very top here. They let it kind of get bumped up in this year. Sometimes they groom it and winch it, so I think it just depends year to year. But a fun little section here. And then what we're going to do is dive into a run called Fall Line. And this is actually the old T-bar section. So they used to have a T-bar that would run up on this section of the ski area. And this is it. So it's a nice little fun, narrow, usually bumped up section. I wouldn't really consider it trees because there's not any really true tree skiing. But it's a fun one to kind of like mix in to these other runs as well. It's a good one. So we'll run this one down in. Then we're going to do the legendary run, Harikari. Here it is, Harikari. This is the run that I think most people, when they think bumps in the Midwest, this is one of them that comes to mind for sure, especially in the spring. The way it faces is amazing because there's a bar at the very bottom so you can watch people. Going there in the springtime, I've talked about it already at length, but this is one of those runs that when it's firing in the spring, it is phenomenal. Now, you can get into it a couple different ways. You can get into it from Manitou Bowl. You can get into it from Split Rock, so you can skip this upper section, which has bumps on it if you just want to do the lower section. I generally try to ski it top to bottom. The upper section is always a little bit questionable, just because I think they don't put as much time and it doesn't get skied as much, so the bumps are always a little bit more, you know, a little bit kind of throw you around style. And then you'll kind of get into this flat section here, feed you kind of under the high speed, and then that's where you're going to hit the lower Harikari, which is more of like kind of the legendary face, because this is the face that faces, as you can see, directly down to the Scandinavian Chalet and bar down there. So when people think Harikari and they think Lutsen spring skiing, this is one of the things that comes to mind. It is so much fun. This run is awesome. I can lap this, and I'm so happy that this is, you know, only a handful of hours away from me, about a 3.5 hour drive or so. And have access to runs like this is phenomenal, and it is just so fun to be able to lap this and work on moguls, because when you, as many of you guys know, when you go out west and you want to ski black diamonds, double black diamonds, it's going to be a lot of moguls. So being able to have this as like a training and practice facility is phenomenal. It's got a nice pitch to it. It's got that perfect pitch where it's steady, it's steep enough, but it's not too intense. So now we're going to start working our way kind of onto the other side, the back side, as I'll call it, of Eagle Mountain. This is going to be the Experts Cutoff run. This also, too, was bumped up. It was a little bit more kind of random bumps than kind of like, skied in really well. So the main difference, obviously, with this run is that you're going to be getting kicked out to the backside, which will then link you up to Lower Bridge Run. In this case, we're going to actually take Timberjack, which is their terrain park. Now, I'll give you a heads up, there wasn't a lot of features there. They are trying to kind of reignite their terrain park program, and that part of that is that new rope tow that's going to go in, so I'll point that out as we get a little bit further down. Yeah, this is a nice run, good to mix in, sees a lot less traffic than those on the front face, just because I think most people are lapping that area and think of Eagle Expert stuff on that side, but this is a good one to mix in, really fun. They usually have kept it all natural like this, bumped up, so it's kind of a fun one to rip through, kind of get those technical turns perfected in here. So we're going to run this one down in, and when we get lower towards the bridge, I'll kind of point out where that rope is going to go, and as we walk through the terrain park. So as you drive in, this is going to be the bridge that you drive under the skiers, and the skiers are going over you, so that's pretty cool. So you have one of our skiers go under, and then one of our skiers go above. Off to our left, that's going to be that Moose access run that we took a little bit ago to get us over to Moose. And then this is going to be their terrain park off to the left. So this is where that new rope tow is going to go. It'll get us up to this section. So they only had, I think it was like one jump or a couple rollers. They were clearly, in between builds and all that. They haven't really had a huge terrain park program in the past. And this is something I know that they're really trying to get going now. So that the rope tow is kind of part of that they want to create more of a culture, and they can do spring jams and all that kind of fun stuff. And then at the bottom off to our left, that's where the bottom of the rope is going to be, and where the shuttle service will kind of pick you up. We'll fly past that, and then this is going to be that lower section of Lower Bridge Run, which will then feed us down, as you can see, into the distance, down to that high-speed Raptor Express. So we're going to run this one in, then we're going to start to work our way into more of the tamer terrain off of this pod of skiing, including one of my favorite tree beginner runs called Charlotte's Web, so we'll do that one next. So now we're going to start to work our way kind of what I'll call the backside of Eagle, and this is going to be their intermediate, kind of beginner intermediate terrain back here. There's nothing super easy, so mostly intermediate focused. So this pod of trees, this run of trees, is phenomenal. It is good. I think it's one of the best learning tree zones I can think of across the Midwest. It's really gently pitched. It's got, a good amount of trees, and it's wide enough where, there's plenty to kind of explore. You're going slow enough where you can stop yourself at any given moment, but it's challenging enough and tight enough in some areas where you can still have fun with it, even if you're kind of a more advanced skier or snowboarder. So I love this patch of trees, and if you talk to anybody that brings their kids up to Lutsen Mountains, they find themselves here very often. Now, when we pop out of this, we're actually going to stay over to skiers' right-hand side, because we're going to be taking the Lodge run, which kind of is on this right-hand side, and this run is actually just kind of mostly just a traversing run. Now, this, instead of going down and going over the bridge that we go over the road, we're going to actually, this is going to traverse us all the way over to the Scandinavian Lodge, and then we're going to link up with that Brule run that we started this whole pot of skiing with, and go under the bridge. So this would be the way, if you were looking to get back to the Scandinavian Chalet, the easiest way, instead of taking that front face, so everything's pretty steep on that front face of Eagle, you would take this way down and around. So when you're kind of done skiing this pot of skiing and you want to go back to the chalet, if you're not an expert skier or snowboarder, this is the way that you're going to take it. And obviously you just want to be a little careful as you kind of work through here. There's going to be some traffic, and then as you get down towards this kind of merge point up here, obviously look up towards Harikari, look up the ski run Koo-Koo over there as well, because you're going to have people kind of flying down. And that's the only thing I don't like about it, just the way that it funnels the traffic into basically two little funnels between the two different bridges. does create a little bit of congestion in this zone specifically when you're going under these bridges, going over the bridges, because everybody from all of those runs are basically coming down to that single run. So just a word of advice, when you come down to that section, regardless of really which run you're skiing, you always just want to kind of make sure that you're keeping your head on a swivel, checking your surroundings, slowing up a little bit as you work through that zone. And then when you get through that, then you want to obviously carry speed so you can go all the way down so you can catch that lift, as you're seeing on screen here. But you just want to be a little bit careful as you kind of get into those little bridge sections there. But we're going to run this one in, then we're going to go up and do a bridge run to short shot. So in my opinion, we were talking about signature runs over on Moose. We talked about Harikari kind of on the front side of Eagle. This is one of the runs that I think is their signature run on the back side of Eagle. This is one of the prettiest runs across the entire Midwest. It's a really good intermediate cruiser. This is my wife's favorite run because you're basically looking out at just a beautiful scenery. You got the lake in the background. It's a nice pitch to it for kind of, you know, those upper beginner intermediate skiers. This is just a fantastic run. And this is, you're going to find a lot of traffic on this one, and then the next run that we'll do, Mogen. These are kind of their really nice intermediate cruisers. Off to our left, that's that Charlotte's Web run that we just did. And then obviously as we get a little bit further down, you'll kind of see where we cut off to that lodge run. Instead, what we're going to do is kind of take the corner and take bridge run all the way down towards the bottom. And once we get down to the bridge, we're going to have a couple of options, and we'll talk about that. In the meantime, I want to talk about this curve up here, because this is another zone that does see a little bit of traffic. As you kind of approach that curve, again, just keep your head on a swivel, because people from Mogen, Charlotte's Web, and Bridge Run are all going to be kind of coming together at that little point. Now, as we get a little bit further down, we're going to come across the bridge, and then you're going to have two basic options. You're going to be able to go skiers right or skiers left. For this particular run that we're going to do, we're going to actually go to skiers right. We're going to start on River Run, but then we're going to take this little kind of like connector run called Short Shot. Don't worry, we'll do a full river run top to bottom and a full lower bridge run over the next handful of runs, but I want to show you this kind of connector run. So this is an interesting one. It doesn't get skied at all. I know it's only a few turns, but there's like cord in this, and this is like late into the day. But this will then kick you back out to lower bridge run. So as you can see towards the bottom of this, it flows. Since we just got a view of how this pot of skiing flows with Brule, you'll notice how much easier it is to get back to the lift on this side. So that's why, like, if you're an intermediate and you're skiing this side, you're gonna want to use these runs to get back to the chair. You're only gonna want to take that lodge run only if you're trying to get back to the Scandinavian lodge, just because it's gonna flow a lot easier. So we're gonna run this one in, then we're gonna do a Mogen to bridge run to lower bridge run. So this is gonna be the easiest run off of Eagle. This is gonna be if you're, you know, going to Eagle for the first time and you don't know where to start, or you're a little intimidated. This is gonna be the run that you want to start with. It's similar to bridge, but it's gonna have a little bit mellower pitch because it kind of cuts off in the back over there, and it's gonna have a little bit more width, about the same, I'd say, maybe, but it'll give you a taste for what bridge will feel like. It's a good run. It doesn't have quite the same views as the bridge run, just because of the way that it's orientated, because you're kind of going off the backside, but this is a really nice and long intermediate run. And that is the one thing you will notice if you bring Midwest, you know, skiers that are beginner intermediate level, is their legs are gonna get tired. My wife, I took her to Lutsen for the first time in decades when she got into skiing again, and that was one of her first comments when we got there for the first days. We skied basically this backside of Eagle all day. A little bit of Ullr, but this mostly. And even just by midday, her legs were tired, because you can see how long this is, and compared to a lot of the ski areas that, you know, you used to skiing in the Midwest, it's triple usually the amount of length and vertical. So your legs are going to get a heck of a lot more of a workout. You might even find yourself having to stop. But just a heads up, so if you're with a family, if you're with, you know, beginner intermediate skiers, this is going to take a lot out of you. So just be prepared for that. And that's why, again, I definitely recommend Lutsen, probably a 2-day trip, just because if your legs aren't used to these longer runs, it can get to you for sure. Even as, someone that skis literally all the time, when I did this filming, by the end of the day I was pretty toast. So it does take a lot out of you, and you got to approach it more like, an out west kind of experience compared to some of our smaller Midwest areas. So we're going to run this one in, then we're going to do a Dipsy Doodle run, which is kind of another tree section off to the backside over there just to the left of Mogen, and then we'll take the bridge run all the way down to River Run. This is going to be another little patch of tree skiing off of this backside here, and this is another good one. Now, I do prefer Charlotte's Web because I think, first of all, they're cleared out a little bit better. It gets a little bit better snow, but also I just think that it's just situated a little bit nicer between the two runs where you can kind of get out on either side. So I would recommend that. This is another good one, though. You'll see a lot of kids kind of coming through here. I just find that the conditions generally aren't quite as good in this patch of trees compared to Charlotte's Web. So, it's a, nice little mellow style tree section in here. And then obviously this will kind of kick you right back out to Mogen. And then that's going to kind of follow that same run down. So these are really good sections for people that are just getting into trees, trying it for the first time, kids that want to kind of create their own adventure through the trees. They're awesome. They're nicely spaced. They're cleared out really well. So as long as they have enough snow, which they usually do in those two pods because they can collect snow from snowmaking, because they're not very, they're not super dense. The snow that does fall tends to find its way down and populate it really well. So usually they are skiable towards the end of the year when all that snow kind of collects. So you'll find a lot of kids in there. They're really fun. Even as an advanced skier, it's fun to kind of rip through there in the spring and things like that. So they're definitely worth checking out. And I know a lot of people love going up there for those little patches of trees up there. As we get a little bit further down, this time what we're going to do, instead of going straight and kind of following the natural path of this down to Lower Bridge Run, what we're going to do is stay to the skier's right-hand side, and we're going to do that river run, and we'll just take that all the way down. That run's actually really nice, less traveled as well, and it almost gets you to the lift a little bit quicker and direct because it basically traverses over right away and then follows the lift line down. So I actually prefer this way, just because I like mixing the two up, but this is a good one, and definitely don't miss out on this one because it sees a lot less traffic than obviously just going straight down onto Lower Bridge Run. So we're going to run this one down, then we're actually going to make our way over to the Ullr Chair and check out their beginner pod of skiing. So this is the Ullr lift. This is a riblet double. I don't have the date on this one. The Ullr pod skiing is really interesting. When I was looking into the history of this chair, the old alignment used to be off to our left-hand side, and it ran all the way down into the valley. So it literally ran, there used to even be a mid-load station. So the first chair they had here, I think it was originally a Palma, but then they put a chairlift in, and you could see it if you go on Google Earth and take a look, but it went all the way down near Mystery down there. So it's pretty crazy, but this is their beginner pod of skiing. I didn't give you guys a little bit of history about Lutsen, so let's talk about that really quick, because it has a pretty deep history. It goes all the way back to the 1880s, actually, when C.A.A. Nelson arrived from Sweden, and he built a rental home that he would rent out to other pioneers that would be traveling through. Many decades later, his grandson, George Nelson, who was a famed 10th Mountain Division member, wanted to bring skiing to Lutsen. In 1948, he started Lutsen Mountains with one rope tow and a couple of runs. Over the years, the hill continued to develop, and then was eventually sold to the Skinner and Ryder family in the 1980s and 90s. And then more recently, in the past handful of years, the Skinner family bought out the Ryder family, and now they own 100% of the ski area. So has a really deep history, and one of the things that we talked about this at the very beginning of the video, but the way that it's laid out the way it is because the whole ski area started by that Scandinavian chalet, and then they kept adding on as they kind of went right? And that's where they ran into the situation where they had to go over the road, under the road, and then they expanded over to Moose Mountain to give them more skiing. So they kind of got gridlocked into this situation due to just their old infrastructure. Just the way that it's laid out, they really didn't have a great choice for where to put chalets and add-on and additions and all that kind of fun stuff. But they do have kind of developed some plans on some land that they do own, so they can actually do this. And they're going to cut some runs kind of off the back of Eagle and maybe put a new chalet off of there with a new beginner's area, which I think would be phenomenal. And it would solve the issue of not having enough chalet space and a dedicated big zone for people to get ready and all that. So that's something obviously going to be years out in the pipeline, and just kind of they're brainstorming how they're going to maybe develop that in the future. But I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of the next stepping stone of expansion for Lutsen Mountains, is starting to build out that little beginner zone over there, because I think it would be phenomenal for families. It would obviously give you a lot easier parking situations, so you're not having to do the street parking and drive down the road and all that kind of fun stuff. And it's just going to be a better built out area for those beginner skiers and snowboarders. But for now, we have Ullr, so let's take a run down Ullr. So we're going to get started with the run all the way on Looker's left-hand side. This is going to be Ullr, and what we're going to do is take a little bit of a cut that goes around to take out the Ullr Headwall. I'm using air quotes here because it's not that steep. But for beginners, I can understand why, you know, if this is one of your first runs, you know, going top to bottom, start at the carpet, come up here, that little steeper section towards the bottom might be intimidating. So this would be the way that you would work around it through Karen's corner. So we'll kind of follow this down. The pitch picks up about here. You're going to kind of snow skate on your way down. And I mean, come on, guys, like, look at the views that you have for a beginner's area. This is one of the prettiest beginner's areas, I think, across the entire Midwest. It's phenomenal. And as we get a little bit further down here, you'll notice that there's kind of a head wall into the distance. We're going to veer off to skier's right-hand side when we kind of hit this slow sign here. And then that's going to kind of take some of that pitch out of the run. So you're going to come down and then lap all the way down and around. So that'll be helpful if, you know, you're a little intimidated by that front pitch. It's nothing intense, but, you know, if you're a first timer, it might be a little bit much. Now, they do have a run that is even more mellow than that run called Big Bunny that goes off of the back. Now, the downside to that, as you'll see a little bit later in this video, is that there's almost like a huge cat track. It's not technically one, but it's pretty much a cat track that comes all the way down and around because you got to go past the beginner's area. We'll see that a little bit later, so I kind of prefer some of these runs off of the front side. This time we'll just do Ullr, and we'll just take the head wall directly, so we'll just go straight down that, and you'll get a gauge for how steep that is. It's really not that intimidating. I think for most people that are skiing, you know, smaller regional Midwest areas, if you're skiing your greens over there, you're going to be just fine skiing this pot of skiing. There's nothing that's that steep or crazy here. But there is a big jump, I will say, from this terrain to going up to Eagle and then eventually Moose. And I think that's where that beginner zone, if they do eventually expand off the backside, the idea would be to build out a little more of these kind of gentler slope runs, because there is a pretty big jump between like a run such as this and then going to a Mogen or a bridge run, especially with how big it is and long it is. That could be a little bit intimidating. Here's the head wall that I was talking about earlier, so not much here, obviously, but, you know, for a beginner, that might be a little intimidating, so it's nice to at least have that option to go down and around. Next, we're going to do Chick-A-Dee, which is one of my favorite runs over here. I usually find myself either skiing Ullr, just lapping that, or Chick-A-Dee. I will say I do usually actually ski Ullr, as silly as it sounds, just because the views are really good, and it's quiet over here. Generally, there's not a lot of crowds. I usually take a few laps. It's not like I'm spending a ton of time over here, but when I go to Lutsen, I usually will do a couple of turns over on the Ullr Chair. It's just a really cool little zone. The other thing I didn't mention is they also do night skiing on this pod. This is the only pod of skiing at Lutsen that has lights. Generally, they do it for race practices up there, but they have been trying to introduce it more for like family festivals, select weekends, and things like that. And I would love to see that, because night skiing is such a big cultural thing for Midwestern folks. So I think it would be awesome to see more night skiing, even if it is every, you know, like a couple times a month. I think that would be awesome to be able to get the experience to night ski at Lutsen. If you haven't been up to Lutsen, there is basically no light pollution up there. So it's like literally the stars are so clear and beautiful. I couldn't imagine being able to ski down a run, and obviously you're going to have some light pollution from those lights, but being able to look up and see all those stars would be kind of phenomenal, I'm not going to lie. Next, we're going to work kind of off of the back side of this powder skiing, and this is where things get... I'm not a fan of these runs on the back, and you'll see why when we get to the bottom, because there's just a huge run out, and it really just takes all the wind out of your sails. Now, Tony's Tango, the run that we're doing right now, is not that bad because it has a little bit of pitch to it. You can usually carry a little bit of speed, and because it's located the closest to kind of that catwalk that goes around that beginner zone over there, this is going to be the easiest one to kind of traverse all the way around. But as you'll see with the next two, they get a little bit tricky, and you end up kind of having to skate and pull your way out of there, especially if the snow is slow. So Tony's Tango has a little more pitch, so this would be kind of the intermediate step if you're looking to do something, try to get a gauge of the pitch before going up to Mogen, Bridge Run, those runs. This would be the one to kind of give a test on. And then obviously this will curve around, you're kind of going around. We have a little maintenance kind of shack over here. I think there's a water tower on to our right-hand side as well. This is that catwalk that I was kind of talking to. Off to our left, you can kind of get a feel for how steep Eagle is. That kind of gives you a good idea of the pitch of that. And then obviously this is going to cut around the corner. You're going to have your conveyor, which we'll do at the very end, and your beginner zone there. So you're going to have to work all the way around that. So we're going to speed this footage up on screen so you can kind of get a feel for how long this is. But we'll run this one in, then we'll go up, and we're going to do a little kind of like through the woods section called Molly's Folly. So this is going to start out exactly the same as Tony's Tango. We're going to hang over to skier's left-hand side, and there's going to be a little path through the woods. I wouldn't consider this tree skiing. This is more like a path through the woods, if that makes sense. It reminds me of a lot of like the mountain bike trails and things like that. There is a little bit of option for choice as far as like taking different lines, but mostly you follow the same rut of everybody else. So it's not my favorite. I mean, it's fine. I can see how kids love this stuff, but for me, it's like, I don't like the bank turns and being forced into somebody else's kind of trail. It's not my thing, but I can see how kids would absolutely love this, and you'll see kids in here all day, but not my cup of tea, but obviously I wanted to show it for you guys as well. I didn't mention this earlier, but all of the names on the trail map are basically names of family members of either the Skinner or the Ryder family. So if you see a name on there, it's most likely going to be one of the children of the families or one of the family members. So just something I want to point out. I wasn't going to go through each of them and point them out because I don't know all the different ones. But yeah, something to keep in mind as we're kind of working our way through that. And then obviously this will be kind of where it comes out. It'll come right back onto that cat track. And then this is going to run all the way down and around. So you're going to get a gauge of how much longer of a traverse this is now, especially because we weren't able to carry as much speed. So we're going to fast forward through this so you kind of get an idea of the length of this. And then we're going to go up and do our last run in this pod of skiing, Big Bunny. This is the tamest run off of Ullr Mountain, but I would definitely not... I think Ullr is fine. I don't know that this... I mean, yes, okay. If you're a very, very, very beginner and you want to do a top-to-bottom run, or if you have a child, this... Okay, it's good. It's a good option to have. But you'll see as we get towards the bottom, the flow of this run really suffers from that catwalk to the point where it gets almost annoying. You know, if you have kids and all that stuff, you're going to end up having to drag them, potentially... all that. It's just the way that it's laid out, having to go all the way down and around makes it really, really tough. So I would recommend if you can do the Ullr run and kind of stick to that front, more of those front-facing runs, I would definitely recommend doing those over a run like this, just because it is, as you'll see, and when we speed up this footage, it is going to be a while till you get back over there, and a lot of work too. So we're going to run this in, and then I'm going to show you their kind of conveyor beginner zone over there, and we'll wrap things up. So this is going to be their conveyor, and they're obviously dedicated learning, very, very beginner zone here. I do love that it's roped off. It's in its own little section. I do want to note that you do have to walk uphill to get to this conveyor, so something just to keep in mind if you have little ones or gear and all that kind of fun stuff. It's not a huge uphill walk, but just something to be prepared for as you get your way up there. And then you can actually see this from the Scandinavian chalet too. So if you go to the upper level of the Scandinavian chalet, you can kind of look out the window and kind of get a little bit of a view of this area up here. But it's just a really gentle, wide open slope, obviously fenced off, so it's nice that you're not getting any kind of cross traffic in its own little land here. So it's great for the little ones that are just getting on skis for the very first time. We're going to run this in, and then I'll give you some stuff that we missed and then some final thoughts. So we did miss a handful of things, so let's go over that really quick. Let's get started over at the Moose Mountain side of things. I mentioned this earlier, but we did miss the Timberwolf chair. That is their riblet double. It's a really long one. Only runs really on like busy weekends. I've ridden it a couple of times. It's really slow, but it's definitely worth riding. I think it's one of the, again, it's one of the riblet, really low to the ground, peaceful rides. It's, you know, you can look over your shoulder. It's very scenic in that sense. We missed a little kind of offshoot. We kind of hit it when we were doing Red Rider, but it's pup. It's kind of just a little elbow kind of run that comes off at Timberwolf. Wolf Den and Antler Alley. Those are runs at the very bottom of Timberwolf, and they're just not skiable unless that chair is running. We missed First Cut, which kind of is just like a connector run that connects Moose Meadows to Moose Glade. We missed Holy Cow, but that's kind of a little chute up there towards the top of Moose Mountain. And then we did a little bit of Valley Run, which was kind of that catwalk that we took that fed us back out to Lower Grizzly from that tree section over there. And we did cut across Moose Crossing, but we didn't, you know, take the full thing. Those are some leftovers from the old runs that would go over the bridge before the bridge washed out. And then the big things that we missed really on this pot of skiing was the double black diamonds off of the backside, Free Fall, and Adrenaline. There used to be 3. They took 1 off of the map. It's really hard to make snow and hold snow in this area, so they open sometimes. They weren't open actually the days that I were there, but they did open a week later, ironically enough. Adrenaline did. I don't think Free Fall's opened for a couple of years, so that's one of those that they don't open very often, but when they do, ski them because you never know if they're going to be available. They're nothing special. It's just a steeper pitch that basically just comes to a catwalk, and it's just a huge catwalk all the way around that takes forever to traverse. It's one of those that you probably do once in a ski day, and then you're like, all right, I don't need to do that again. It's fun. It's good practice for, you know, steeper turns. The problem is that you want to carry speed at the bottom to get yourself back around the cat track. So you end up missing, you know, because you kind of like shoot the last like third of the run. So you only get like 2/3 of the pitch. So that's my only gripe with it. So it's one of those things like if it's open, I'll do it like once and then move along. It's a fun one to say you did, and obviously to get some of the feel of steeper turns. But like, yeah, it's those that know. We missed some stuff, obviously, over on Mystery Mountain. Basically, everything left of the chairlift is closed currently, temporarily. I don't know if that will come back online or when that'll come back online. I'm sure that they have a long-term game plan for that. There was Dave's Glade, which is technically open, but it was very, very, very grown in and just not very skiable in its current condition. So until that gets kind of cleaned up a little bit, I don't think that that's something that is right now super skiable. So I'm excited though if they can put some effort and time into Mystery Mountain. I think it has a lot of potential. So I'm excited to see kind of how this develops, this pot of skiing develops over the next handful of years as they kind of revitalize Lutsen Mountains. And then over kind of on the front face over here, on Eagle Mountain, we didn't miss really much. We missed Lift Line, which is just kind of a connector run that goes from Koo-Koo / Split Rock and then connects you up with Harikari. That runs basically directly under the Raptor Express. We obviously missed the Bridge Chair, which only runs for summer operations or, you know, is a redundant lift just in case the Raptor goes down. I do miss that chair a little bit. It's a nice little, it's a lower to the ground. Again, those riblets are just so peaceful, the way that they're cut and the way that they ride. But yeah, it's still there, just doesn't operate very often. And then the other thing that we did miss is over on the Brule run, when you go under the road. there actually is an easier way down that kind of goes all the way around. So we just kind of shot down. You can actually kind of take a little bit of a cat track that goes all the way down on the round. The problem is if you lose all that speed when you get down to the valley, then you're going to end up having to pull and skate your way across the bridge. So normally you're going to just want to take the straight way down and then just try to carry some speed to get over the bridge. Lutsen Mountains, man, this is a long video, obviously. We spent a lot of time both filming, editing. Thank you. If you made it to the end of this video, please do me a favor, hit that like button to subscribe to the channel. We put a lot of effort into this video to make sure we were as comprehensive as possible, because it's important in a place like this where there's just so much for everybody here. And I think that's where Lutsen Mountains really shines. Obviously, you're getting more vertical, you're getting more terrain, but really there is terrain for everybody here. And that's what's pretty phenomenal about it. You can go, as long as they are at a certain level of skiing, you can take them over to Moose Mountain. There's a lot of different runs that you can spread out and ski. And it's one of the few ski areas in the Midwest that you can spend multiple days at and still find places that you probably haven't skied before. To give you an idea, this session took me a literal full day bell to bell, did not take a lunch break, so it was 9 to 4. And then the second day I skied until 9 until probably about, it was 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So that just gives you an idea of what Lutsen has to offer. If you live on the west side of Lake Michigan, you gotta visit this area at least once. And I would definitely recommend visiting, watching the conditions and visiting when the conditions are the best, because that's going to give you the best experience. When I went back to film with TGR, we hit it perfect and everything was open and the trees were phenomenal. And that's when I had my like aha moment, and I was like, oh, now I understand why this place is so amazing. Both the conditions, the atmosphere, the views, and then the terrain. They are missing really steep technical terrain from that side of things, but that's not really what this place is built for. This is built for families that have a bunch of different abilities of skiers and snowboarders that they can post up for a couple of days and really make a true weekend getaway out of a Midwest area. And that's exactly what this ski resort or area is. If you like groomers and if you like, terrain that you can rip turns and occasionally jumping into the bumps, and this is going to be a place for you. You can spend a couple of days here. The setting's amazing. Spring skiing, gotta do it. But for those of you that have been to Lutsen Mountains, what do you guys think? Drop your comments below. But until next time, I hope everybody has a great week. Pray for that snow, and I'll see you out there.